Really? Aye. Okay. I'm not online just yet. Hello, hello. Here we are. I'll grab my live here. Welcome. Hi. All right. We are getting into curriculum today. If you are interested in this subject, leave a comment in the feed. Let me know what's your biggest need around curriculum. I want to make sure that we address that today. Just getting some of my stuff set up. Hold on. Sorry about that. Okay. So, yay, nice to have you. Welcome, welcome. Let's see. Good morning. Good morning, Cheryl. Good morning, Heather. Jill. Hi, Tina. Awesome. Yeah, let me know what is your biggest need around curriculum, because I know this is a big topic and it's something that you can get bogged down in really fast. And I don't want you to, my goal here is to help you narrow down your decision making, not make it worse. Okay. So, so make sure you let me know what things can really serve you today in the area of curriculum. We're going to talk about a couple of different parts about curriculum. And I'm also going to give away my favorite journal for kids. I mean, let's be real. I kind of like this journal. I haven't used it yet myself, but I secretly think I might buy myself a copy. So I'm going to be giving away a great journal today for kids. Actually, I have 2 copies, so if you're interested in that, you'll be wanting to stay on. Jill says, I have to resist doing all the things with curriculum, prepping ahead on what to realistically do and not do. Yes, absolutely. And we're going to talk a little bit about what that looks like and how to stay sane while we're choosing curriculum, right? So that's a great point. Absolutely. So we're going to talk about 3 things. We're going to talk a little bit first about the philosophies behind curriculum and the methods. If you're a seasoned homeschooler, you're going to be very familiar with this, but if you're new, kind of new to the system, this is an important place to start. And I don't want to jump over this because this will help inform you what possibilities are going to help you, and what possibilities you can kind of like set aside because it's not going to be in alignment with the way that you want to homeschool. Okay. And we're going to talk about the individual needs of kids, as well as a little bit of discussion for the needs of your state. Now, I'm not going to get into specific state guidelines, but there are some things that we can discuss that are universally applicable to adhering to state guidelines, okay? And then we're going to talk a little bit about how to help you use curriculum well and use it as a tool. And hopefully these 3 things will help guide you to making a good decision about curriculum today, because that's going to be your homework. You're going to work on nailing down what curriculum to use today, if you haven't already. So please do let me know if you have specific things that you're looking for, and we will get going. Let's see. Just checking the comments before we get really going into this. My 9th grader is needing geometry, but I can't choose a program curriculum. I'm so nervous about choosing one. Yeah. All right, I'll make a note of that. Let's see. All right, yet to find spelling, English, language arts curriculum that works for us. Needs something that kids can do mostly on their own, preferably phonics based. Yep. All right, yeah, and I'm going to give you some resources to help narrow this down, okay? So I'm not going to tell you, oh, this is the curriculum to use. I'll tell you what I'm doing during this time. You'll find out like these are the things that I've chosen and this is why. But that's not the fit for everybody. So please know that when I tell you what I'm doing, it's more just as an idea. It's not, I think everybody ought to be doing it this way, okay? All right, so these are great. Let's get into a couple of things here. Let's first want to tell you that curriculum primarily is not just created, homeschool curriculum is not just created for, we need to teach them academics. Like most curriculum has a philosophy behind the method that they choose to teach. Now, one of those methods can be our only goal is to accomplish this academic goal in as secular an experience as possible. And if you look for those, they're going to be curriculums that line up much more. It's going to be more like your public schooling at home, virtual learning, the free state virtual learning is going to come under that. They're going to have a set, the set standards that they recommend everybody follow in the state. And the curriculum is going to be primarily created so that students can pass those standards, whatever they are. All right. So that is one philosophy and that is primarily, that's what people call, when you hear homeschoolers talk about, that isn't homeschool, that's schooling at home. What they're, most of the time, what they're actually trying to say, with, and not meaning to offend people, though it often does, and it's really unfortunate, but what they're trying to say is the philosophy that you're using is to take the school standards and just do them at home. You're not choosing a different philosophy of how to school. You're doing the same kind of schooling at your house that you were doing at the school. So it's a pretty bad sticking point for, I think a lot of times what happens is that homeschoolers come off as, we have a clique of homeschooling and you're not part of it. That's, I think, what often comes around when people start using this phrase of, this is not homeschool, this is school at home. And I think if you look at the different philosophies behind how curriculum is made, it'll make a lot more sense why some people are trying to differentiate between the two, because the philosophy informs a lot of how you school, how you do your schooling program at home. And a lot of homeschoolers really do pick a different philosophy, and it changes everything that they do and how they do it. It's really not just, we're doing this program at home. Now, if you choose that program, that's fine. If you look back at your whys, and your whys are primarily, I want to stay on point with maintaining the standards that the state has set up, that's my goal, is so that if I want to jump back into school, that there's not a as big of a learning curve, that they'll be right on track with exactly what people have been learning in the school. If that's your goal, then that's an okay choice for you to make, right? And that might be the philosophy that you take, is, okay, this is my priority. But as I'm going to share with you these other the other philosophies, you may decide that your priorities are a little different. And if they are, they're going to look different. So family style, yes, family style programs are great homeschooling programs, and that kind of gets into that's more like methods as opposed to philosophies, right? So so first, let's talk a little bit about philosophies, and then we're going to talk a little bit about the methods of how we use them in our homes. Okay, so philosophies. The first one we're going to talk about is a traditional philosophy. If you want to read more about this, you can go to the website homeschoolcompass.com, and they've got a great article that I'm kind of following the outline of to help understand some of these things. But they've got a great article about the different philosophies of homeschooling. So we're going to talk about that. Feel free to ask questions. So the first philosophy that we're going to talk about is the traditional method. Okay, the traditional method. This is going to be more similar to what you would experience in public school. They're going to have a textbook and workbooks. They expect you to take quizzes or tests. There's usually some sort of teacher's lesson plan to go along with that. And these traditional methods are going to be, or I say method, but it's a philosophy of learning, really. That's what's going on here. That's going to be like Abeka. If you do Bob Jones University, that's a more traditional method. Your the ACE PACES packs are that way. Christian Liberty Press does that. Saxon Math is kind of a traditional math program. These are all things that you can usually type in, my child is in thus and such a grade, and they will say, here is your curriculum for 3rd grade, or here is the option for 10th grade. or whatever. A lot of these are, not all of them, but a lot of them are full packages. Like you could buy the 3rd grade set and it's going to come with math and science and reading and writing and everything. Most of them also allow you to pick and choose, that you can say, hey, I've got everything figured out, but I want to pick out this math. Or I know I need something that is really straightforward, traditional learning for spelling, or traditional learning for math. And so as we go through these philosophies, you'll find that a lot of people combine philosophies, like some traditional with some other things, so that you have kind of a mixture of the philosophies of learning. But different subjects people find are more successful in their families choosing a different philosophy. So for instance, in our family, excuse me, for math, we prefer a traditional approach. And so we use Matthew C. We've used Matthew C before. We've used, this year, we're going to try out some Saxon math for our family. And so I like the structure of the daily workbook for that subject. Other subjects, we're not using a traditional method. We're not using workbooks, for instance, for some of the other subjects that we're doing, but because we want to do them differently, okay? So the nice thing about traditional methods is that it's very straightforward. It's easy to follow. There's usually a clear plan for you to do. There's usually some sort of checklist that comes with the program that helps you be able to check off when you've done things. There's tests involved, things like that. What it doesn't do as well is it's not as easy to incorporate multi-grade learning. You're going to find that it's not as easy to address different students' learning styles, because it's primarily a textbook, workbook kind of thing. And in a lot of times, students can find it not very engaging, kind of boring. So again, for math, we're choosing to go that route this year, but for other things, we're not. So that's the traditional method, all right? And it has its place. Then let's talk about the next philosophy. I keep saying method, and that's because the Homeschool Compass uses method, but I'm going to talk about something different about methods in just a minute. So the traditional philosophy is straightforward academic subject. The next one we're going to talk about is a classical philosophy. A classical philosophy, what they mean by that is that there's this theory that students have a natural development process in how they learn information. And so the theory is that when the child is young, in kind of from the earliest years that they're able to talk up until somewhere around anywhere from 4th to 6th grade, which is like 9 to 11 years old, they have this, what they call the grammar stage. And the grammar stage is all about the child having a unique ability to memorize information and take and absorb information into their memory, that they are very good at memorizing. And I want you to consider how easy you've seen for little kids to memorize something versus in your adult years and thinking, I'm going to memorize something. Kids can remember little quotes from movies way easier than I can. I can remember verses from the Bible that I memorized when I was little that I struggle to learn and memorize things now, right? So that's the grammar stage. And the classical philosophy says, let's use this natural ability to our advantage. And so the focus in those years is to help them memorize a lot of different pieces of information. That is the philosophy. We're going to memorize a lot of different pieces of information. And you may or may not know a whole lot about what you're memorizing. So it's kind of what one of the examples that the classical model uses is the grammar stage is like hanging pegs on a wall, and we're going to nail these pegs into the wall. We aren't really using them very much yet, but we know that we're going to need them later. And later in their academic career, they can begin to hang things on their pegs. But it's a whole lot easier to hang something there if it's already got a peg in the wall. So if you come across a classical model of learning, it's going to look like little kids memorizing all of their times tables really early. Or maybe they learn little repetitious songs about the different parts of speech. Like there's a noun and a verb and an adverb and an adjective and a preposition. Or maybe they memorize a song of prepositions. All right. They might, memorize things like what all the conjunctions are. For and, let's see, for and nor or but. No, for and nor, but or yet so. So they might memorize that. They might not know what to do with it though, right? So it's a great time to memorize scripture. All right. So whether you follow the classical philosophy or not, it's worth knowing that a child at that age has an unusual ability to memorize information. This is their best time of their life to do that. Then the classical philosophy says that when you're starting to get into those preteen years and early teen years, you get into the dialectic stage, which is they have an unusual capacity to wrestle with information and move it around and try the different parts together. And you know that this is true because of how your child goes from a willingness to absorb information to arguing about information. We see that in the natural progression of things in our house. I don't want to talk to you about why you need to unload the dishwasher and put it that way or load it this way. I just want you to do the stupid thing. Like, could you just do what I told you to do? What happened to just doing what I told you to do? Why do we have to have a big long discussion about it? And all of a sudden our kids are starting to wrestle with the whys of things and why does it apply to them and how does it apply to them? And that's the natural dialectic stage. And so in that stage, the classical model encourages us to give them information that they can wrestle with. So that's why you start moving into upper level math information. You start, that's when classical models would typically teach things like how to diagram sentences and how to move the parts around. It's when they start teaching children how to write paragraphs and stuff. And actually, you'll find that the classical model does not very often start teaching the grammar of the how to use the parts of speech and how to write until they start getting to be in that 9 to 11-year-old age, because that's the stage that they're naturally in to be able to wrestle with different parts of information and put it together. So they really focus on that. They're going to focus on things like on how to start understanding logic and understand how to come up with a logical argument. They're going to start understanding more critical thinking and why people do things the way they do and how different cultures behave and why they've chosen to do those things. Classical method models also typically focus pretty heavily on Latin and Greek influence and how we got to where we are and the philosophers that came before. There's a pretty heavy focus there as well. And then in the high school years, a classical philosophy is going to focus on what they call the rhetoric stage, which is these kids are old enough that they're ready to start practicing presenting information, right? So they're going to focus more on speech, how to become a really eloquent writer, how to debate well, how to use logic in a way that supports their arguments well, how to recognize when they're using logical fallacies, which I think most of our country has forgotten that even exist. Um, so they're going to learn Latin or Greek, learn essays, how to analyze writing. They're going to learn different philosophies and theologies. A classical model is going to focus on themes in literature and decisions that different characters in novels made and why they made them and how to argue that they should have made a different choice, or and those are the kind of things. And then they learn how to discuss. One of the big things in the rhetoric stage is how to have a Socratic discussion, basically how to have a conversation with other people that isn't one-sided or shallow. And that's one of my personal loves about the classical model is, we're teaching people how to have good conversation, how to have deep and meaningful conversation, and how to input into conversation, and also how to allow others to input information into conversation, when to stay silent, how to ask good questions so that you draw out other people's thoughts about a subject. So that's some of the focuses of a classical philosophy. It's usually tailored to the natural stages of a student's development, like the grammar stage is young, the dialectic stage is kind of those middle years. So that's kind of cool. It really focuses on memorization, and that is something that the students carry with them, and it can actually set them up for being able to go a lot further, a lot faster in later years. You can also, through this process, teach kids to learn more independently, because they're in the natural stage of development. What they're doing is going to come more naturally in general at that stage. Some of the cons that people have had is that the memorization is really repetitive, and sometimes it can feel really rigorous, and people like, I don't want my kids to just spend all this time memorizing random facts and not really knowing what to do with them. Sometimes the focus of ancient languages like Latin and things like that get in the way, and people are like, what? I don't really see a lot of purpose in my child learning Latin. Nobody speaks that. Why are we learning that? I'd rather them learn Spanish, for instance, because there's so many people around me that speak Spanish. I'd like for them to know how to talk to them. So those are some of the negatives. And if you aren't really focused on having your math and your science, a lot of times a classical model can be very literature-based, very heavy on the literature and philosophy and language-based. And if you aren't really intentional, you can end up skipping out on the math and even some of the sciences if you aren't careful. So that's something that requires a little bit more of intention if you're using a classical philosophy. All right, the third one, you guys hanging in there with me? The third one is the Charlotte Mason philosophy, which in a nutshell is a philosophy that says that, Charlotte Mason was a British educator back in the 1800s. And she is the one that came up with this idea. But her philosophy is that school should be fun, it should be enjoyable, and you should be able to use kind of the natural things around you to be able to learn key pieces of information, and that character really matters and good habits really matter, and that is even more important than whether or not you really excel in your math facts. So the things that tend to be Charlotte Mason tend to be shorter lessons, more experiential. They're going to be, they might have a little bit of, in the language arts, it's more like narration, dictation, and then correcting things or reading real books. They're not going to have a lot of textbooks. It's going to be more reading aloud stories and discussing the themes in the story. Most Charlotte Mason people tend to do a lot of exploratory things outside, a lot of exploring nature, as well as things in the home. There's a big focus on learning how to bake and doing the everyday life things, chores, and maybe they have farm animals, or maybe they explore bugs, or those kinds of things really appeal to those people who are following a Charlotte Mason kind of philosophy. And they read a lot of books, which is fun. The things about this philosophy is that kids often really enjoy the learning process. It's very creative, and it can feel like their natural experiences of life are just sort of flowing with the school experience of life. You can, they don't end up having a lot of busy work. It's much more active, and so those are kind of it makes it fun. They also tend to introduce a lot more art and literature in real experiences than, hey, let's study this artist and mimic his work. It's going to be more, though you might look at that, it's going to be a little more creative than that usually. Let's paint a picture. Let's discover what pointillism looks like by getting out our stuff and painting a picture with dots. And we could do that with big bingo dots, and we could do it with Q-tip dots, and we could do it outside, and those kinds of things. How can we make this learning process fun and in an exploratory way? Some of the things that people don't like about the Charlotte Mason method or philosophy is that it can be very child-centered and not structured enough. Sometimes people feel like that there end up being gaps in what they're learning, like they don't know their math facts well enough, or they haven't learned enough specifically about English grammar to, for instance, pass one of the state tests. They know how to write sentences and they enjoy it, but if you ask them, where do you need capital letters and periods, they can't, like, they could even do it, but they wouldn't be able to like tell you specifically where they're supposed to go. So some of those things. And yeah, so that's the Charlotte Mason method. Then you have unit studies, which are primarily topical. So, and usually go along with teaching a family all together. Like, hey, our whole family is going to focus on bugs. We're going to focus on bugs. And so what they would do in a unit study is you would take the topic of bugs, for instance, and you would say, what can we learn in math about bugs? What can we learn in English about bugs? We might write a paper about bugs. We might diagram some sentences about bugs. We might count bugs. We might dissect an ant. We might go on a nature walk and look at bugs. We might take pictures of bugs. We might do a science experiment. We might study bugs in different cultures and what bugs exist in the Middle East, or what bugs exist in Asia, that kind of thing. And so you get this, you get like a topical piece of information, and you take all of your subjects and you incorporate them from that topic. Again, this, much like the Charlotte Mason philosophy, is something that quite often kids are very interested in, and often the units are based around what a child is interested in. So it's going to be something that's very family friendly. A lot of, like, everybody can do something with that topic, and so there's a lot of teamwork involved in that, which is really cool. You get quite a broad view of different subjects and how they relate to each other, which is really cool. A lot of times it's a very inexpensive way to do school, and so because you can use a lot of what's going on around you to be able to do that. And you pull in resources from different areas of your life rather than buying a set of books and curriculum. So those are some of the pros. Obviously, some of the cons of the unit method are that you can have gaps in your learning. If you're going to study about bugs and then you're going to study about, let's say you read a book, and so your unit study is around Little House on the Prairie, for instance, and you end up learning about how to grow stuff on a farm and how to take care of animals, and you might learn how to calculate what it costs to plant food versus and the expense of growing it, and then the ability to sell it, and that might be how you do your math. And but obviously there's not a progression of things that you do to ensure that that person catches all of the different pieces of math that they need to learn. Maybe they get really focused on adding, subtracting, but they're not so focused on dividing. Or maybe in a unit study you end up learning a lot about the Brazilian culture, and they'll know a lot about the Brazilian culture, but nothing about Southeast Asia whatsoever. I know a lot of people use unit studies to focus on history, and I have heard of families that got so fascinated in unit studies on history, for instance, like, okay, we're going to learn about World War II. And if you aren't careful, what can happen is, and now we're on a unit study about World War II for 2 years, and so their kids learn all about World War II. They know everything there is to know, and they've had a grand time, but none of them can tell you what the Vietnam War was about, and none of them can tell you anything about the Revolutionary War, and they certainly can't tell you about the Trojan horse back in ancient times. And so it can be a little bit hitchy if you aren't careful. It also requires quite a bit more planning because nobody's planning that for you. There are a few curriculums that will plan some of that for you, but by and large, you end up pulling a lot of that stuff together yourself. So that is the unit study philosophy and how that works. There's a literature-based idea, basically, that if you study high quality books and learn through biographies, autobiographies, ancient texts and writings, original documents, like for our government, the Declaration of Independence, or original documents for other societies, different historically classic fiction, and that becomes the central focus, that gives a passion for the subjects, and the students can enjoy learning about all kinds of subjects through literature. It has some of the same advantages and disadvantages to the unit study method and the Charlotte Mason method, and a lot of people combine those three and kind of mix the three together quite a bit. Usually students end up with a pretty high vocabulary and understanding of reading and writing from a literature-based program. But again, it does often have gaps. It can be really frustrating if you've got a kid that's a really slow reader and has a difficult time with that. And it's not as structured as the classical or the traditional philosophies would be. And then you get the most unstructured philosophy, which is the unschooling method. So the unschooling method is a philosophy of learning. I want to be clear that there are people who say that they are unschoolers that are doing school. There are people that are unschoolers that are simply not teaching their children, okay? And unfortunately, they both get mixed together. And so I want to be clear that I'm talking about an unschooling philosophy, not just simply not teaching your children anything, okay? But the unschooling philosophy is a method that doesn't follow curriculum or a plan. The idea is we're going to use the children's interests to guide them and help them learn. It's a very relaxed thing, so the kid comes up with something that they're interested in, and that is the catalyst behind what they learn that year or how they learn it. A lot of things would be like, we're going to incorporate learning our ABCs in the sandbox because they're interested in drawing letters, or they're going to discover bugs outside and they come up fascinated from a plant that they saw that had a bug on it and they wanted to know what it was. And so that becomes the catalyst for learning about that particular animal, and maybe it branches out into other interests. And they keep learning about that until the child is onto something different. And then if the child is interested in something different, then they pull in whatever they become interested next in, how to, build a boat. And so then they use that as an educational experience. And you start pulling in sciences and history of boat building and different things like that that relate to what they're interested in. It does lack structure, and the weakness is a lot of times what happens is I would consider the maximum potential for gaps in their education in this philosophy, but their philosophy is not worried about gaps. They're much more interested in helping children learn that school is part of the everyday life, and that learning is just part of what you do every day. And sort of tapping into that interest and curiosity. So those are some of the philosophies behind different curriculum. All right. And so having that in your back pocket, figuring out what philosophies appeal to you can really help you narrow down what you're going to do with your child. Okay. So I would say that we use a combination, just for what we do, we use a combination of Charlotte Mason and classical and traditional philosophies. We use the classical model, so I focus heavily on getting my kids to memorize things when they're little, and the dialectic and the rhetoric as a structure for how we work with the material. However, I see weaknesses in math, and so I like having a more traditional approach to math lessons, and some of I like my children to be able to pass the state standardized test if they need to, and so I'll throw in a little bit of grammar education on the beginning, like how to actually work with some of the writing pieces, like knowing where capitalization is and a little spelling. I add a little bit of that in on the younger grades because we are required to pass a state test. And so, or we're required to at least take the test. And so I add some of those traditional pieces. However, I love the Charlotte Mason idea of getting out and exploring. And so it's not unusual that when we've homeschooled before, we'll do things like, you know what, we're taking our books to the park. And we'll take the books to the park, and it'll be a little bit more relaxed approach where they might do some studies and then they might go off and play. And I incorporate a lot of chores and baking and cooking and how to do different practical things into our school. It's actually part of what makes the rest of school doable, is that they participate in the house. And that is a very Charlotte Mason approach. Charlotte Mason also really emphasizes doing things like reading out loud to your kids. And I find that that's just a very precious time of the day. And so that gets incorporated into what we do. And I back off a little bit on what we do classically so that I can prioritize Bible devotions and reading aloud to my kids every day. So just like that, you can kind of mix and match. But if you know what unschooling is, or what Charlotte Mason is, or classical, and the methods behind them, it makes it easier to see how a curriculum will or will not support your family very quickly. If you can figure out what philosophy is behind that curriculum, you can weed it out a lot faster, or say, oh, this one might actually work. Okay. So that's why I'm stuck on that for so long. I'll jump over here and do something about methods. Methods is just what I'm talking about when I say you can either decide to do your kids all together for subjects or independently. So we break up our kids do individual language arts and math, but for other things, we try to group them together until they get to high school. Just for the convenience and sanity of the family. And a lot of things, science and social studies, history, music, art, all of those, Bible, all of those types of things, you can teach a wide variety of ages all the same material, and the older kids can learn it at a deeper level, and the younger kids can just memorize facts and learn it on a very basic level, but you can all be learning the same thing. And it helps, it cuts down on the number of different things you're trying to do as a parent in your family. I would also say that it encourages family unity, because you end up having really cool conversations with each other. All right, so that's philosophies and methods for right now. If there's any questions about that, I want to make sure that I'm addressing anything you need. Let's see. I'm thinking about Charlotte Mason, Sunlight, or CC. Probably not a real possibility because of COVID, along with Matthew C., because that's what people I know already are doing. Yes, I mentioned that the other day. If you're trying to figure out what to do, look for people who are already doing something and have results with their kids that you like, and go do that first. I know I don't want to do a lot of lesson planning, intensive hands-on projects. Yes, so you're going to be looking for something that is already really structured, flexible, something that can involve little kids. I want to read lots of real books over textbooks and workbooks. Yes, independently. Yeah. So specific subjects that you need kids to do independently, I would move more towards a workbook for those things. And then the things that you want little kids to be able to be involved in, I would look more for the Charlotte Mason approach for those things, like reading lots of real books and things like that. That's great. Easy peasy, all-in-one homeschooling. Yes, that's very structured. Yep. Keep in mind that what we haven't talked about is that there are theological pieces to different programs as well. For instance, Abeka is a Christian-based program. Bob Jones is a very conservative Christian Protestant-based program. There's Catholic-based programs. There's secular programs. The Good and the Beautiful was written by a Mormon. And so their worldview, whether it's obvious or not, is probably going to inform some of their programs. Now, there are programs out there that are written by Protestants or Catholics or things like that, that they have tried really hard to really just focus on the academic side of things. And so they're much more minimal in how their program impacts you from a worldview point of view. For instance, Demi Learning has shifted that way. Their staff is a combination of Catholic and Protestant believers, primarily, but their program, they have tried to make it something that if public schools wanted to be able to use it, that they could, and it doesn't have a lot of their Christian worldview written into the program. But a lot of the programs out there, they do. And so you want to be aware of what the worldview is of the program that you're choosing, if that matters to you. The curriculum you've chosen for 4th grade is more Charlotte Mason, anxiety-ridden, not focused at all kid. I feel like it's perfect. Yeah, that's great. That's great. And if you haven't done this before, you're not going to really have a real good, solid, clear picture of what works for you until you try it. I know that there's some things that I was able to weed out. Like, I know that I am not very good without some sort of deadline or accountability. And so I knew that unschooling for us would really look like not actually teaching my kids any school. And so I kind of ruled that out as a philosophy. And as a result, that just cuts out a whole horde of things that I don't even have to consider. Same thing with unit methods. I know that I need something that's going to help me pace well. In unit studies, I would end up stuck and not moving through it at a reasonable enough time, and I would get stuck in one unit. And so I kind of ruled out unit studies as a philosophy of teaching, and that just helped me cut out a whole selection of stuff for homeschooling. Do I use a Christian worldview curriculum, and which one? I use Classical Conversations, which is a Protestant Christian worldview. They do allow anybody to be a part of their program, whether you're Christian or not. You do have to agree to their, you have to agree that the guidelines that they're set up, the worldview that they are presenting, that you're not going to argue with it in class. And as a result, there's Catholics and Jews and Muslims and all kinds of people that are involved in Classical Conversations. But they come in with the understanding that this is going to be presented from a Christian worldview, and you know that going in, and so you're not going to fuss about it in the program. You do have to go through a process of being an interview process in order to teach in order to be one of their tutors. If you wanted to tutor, you do have to be a professing believer and be willing to agree that Jesus died on the cross, that it was the payment for sins, that he was buried and rose again on the 3rd day, you believe in the Holy Spirit. And like, there's a whole list of things that you must be a person that does agree with their worldview in order to tutor with them. But you don't have to be a believer to be in their program, which I think is nice. So yes, their program, their whole philosophy is to know God and make him known. That's their ultimate goal. And so the way that they teach and the things that they try to present are from that place of how can we know God, how can we help our students know God and make them known. Saxon is what we're using this year for math. It's more of a traditional philosophy, and it is a program that is not, I would say, it's more secular in nature. It's just to the degree that you can present math problems and teach how to do that. It's more of a universal teach this method of math and tries not to incorporate a worldview. But as by default, it's a secular worldview, like it leaves God out. And a lot of people think of that as, depending on how strong you are about your worldviews, if it leaves God out, a lot of people say, well, that's an atheistic worldview. I do think there are subjects that you can say, okay, we're just going to teach this skill. And then we often look for how does math honor God? And we talk about that in our family. The Bible says that the heavens declare the glory of God and the skies proclaim the work of his hands in Psalms. And so a lot of times in our homeschooling, we look for how does math honor God? How does science honor God? And the classical conversations really supports that kind of an idea. And that's one of the reasons that we like it. It also gives the deadlines and the accountability that I like. So that's one of the reasons I use that. By the way, I don't get anything if you sign up for classical conversations or not, you guys. Like, I know there's some talk out there that it's like an MLM scam. That's not true. I have directed for them before. That is so not true. So other curriculums I've used before that I really like that come from Sunlight is a Christian perspective. My Father's World is from a Christian perspective, and both of those use a lot. They're very literature heavy, meaning that they read real books on a regular basis, and those are fun. If you want more information about curriculum specifically, or you want to read reviews about curriculum specifically, you can go to is it EY or Y? It's Kathy Duffy reviews. Yeah, just Y. .com. And she has done this for years. When I was homeschooling in the 8th grade, my mom had one of her books. I think it was one of her books, but anyway, she's been doing this for years, and she does reviews of homeschooling materials. She will explain the different philosophies that something comes from, some of the good things, some of the things that people don't like about programs. She also has like a top 102 homeschooling picks that if you go to her website, they'll have a little apple next to her top picks, and that can help you narrow down what you think about different curriculums. It'll also give you probably way more ideas for curriculum than what you ever wanted. But so don't get bogged down there. Be really careful about getting sucked in and never being able to get back out of the curriculum giant mosh pit that will take you down. So this is really helpful. Yeah, master books is a great one. A lot of people really like master books. And that is Christian based. I haven't used that one personally. I don't have a lot of experience, but I know that a lot of people really like it. Yeah, okay. So that's your philosophies, the needs. Make sure, if you haven't checked with what your state requirements are for subject matter, that you check with that. I know when we lived, for instance, in New Hampshire, there was a random requirement that every single year your child needed to learn something about the state government. And so it's important that you know what those things are. However, don't get overwhelmed when it says 16, if you're in a state that says 16 different subjects they have to learn. Most states do not have something that says you have to learn something about this every single day, or you have to learn about this for 4 weeks of the year. You have to learn something. So, for instance, when we were in New Hampshire, we had to learn something about state government. A tour of the Capitol, check that off. Or a day of reading about or learning about who our governor was and who our local state representative was and our senator, checks that box. And you know, the older they are, the more that matters. And the younger they are, the more you're kind of like, wait, why do I have to spend a lot of time on this right now? So just introduce it as an idea, like, hey, these are our people, and we can write a letter. And you know, a lot of times people write a letter to their governor or their president or whatever, and they'll get one back, and I think that's really cool. So some things like that. So know what your state requirements are, and remember that it probably doesn't mean you have to spend all year on it. For instance, a lot of places say you're required to teach them science and social studies. Okay, well, in classical conversations, they get introduced to one science concept and one historical concept every single week. And we just focus on that one concept. That doesn't mean that we've got to have this big, giant program for science and social studies. It can be small, right? So don't bite off more than you need to, all right? Oh, I'll write that other link up there if you want to know more about the methods, the homeschool. Compass.com. This is where I got the information about, primarily, they have a really good organized document about philosophies, right? Oh, feel free to ask questions, and I want to go ahead and do our drawing for the people that have commented so far. And then I'll have a couple of things about preschoolers. Where's my list here? All right, pardon me, I gotta go get something. Let's see. I don't know where my list went. Well, sorry about that. I had a list of all my people. Oh, there it is. All right, so if you've been waiting to find out about the recommended journal, my recommended journal for kids is called Rec This Journal. I love this. My boys have especially enjoyed this journal. And the fun thing is that it has blank pages for them to write things in, but then it has all kinds of little challenges that they can do. Like this says, with this page, make a funnel, drink some water, cut it out, roll in tape, add water and drink. Another page says, collect all your fruit stickers here. Stickers you find on bought fruit go on this page. Another one says, let's see, what was that? One page says, take this book in the shower and hold this page open. Rub here with dirt. All right. Sleep with the journal in your bed, describe the experience. So it's a very active journal, and it's so funny. Place sticky things here: honey, gum, syrup, glue, a sucker, marshmallows. Sew this page together. So just all kinds of fun little things that are exciting. It's one of my favorite journals for kids to go through. So I actually have 2 of those to give away today. And for those of you who have little kids, I actually have this really adorable, cute Peter Rabbit 1 through 12 book collection. I have used this a number of times. Not this one, but I had a copy for years and years and years, and I loved throwing them in my purse because it's such a tiny, tiny little book, and you can take it places and read them a book when you're waiting somewhere. I was going to show you, hold on. I like coming up with things that my kids can do when we go places. We have, when my kids were little, we had a little thing called a go out to eat bag. And I always had a few little toys in it because I'm not carrying around 7 electronics for them to entertain themselves. No, no, no. So these books are this big. Look at this. And the whole story really is in there with all the pictures. How cool is that? Also, there's something about really teeny tiny things that kids find fascinating. And you can throw one of these in the smallest purse and have a cute little book for your kid to read while you're out somewhere. So I'm giving away this collection and 2 journals today, if you're still on. And if you are interested in the information about preschoolers, stay on, all right? All right, so for today, let's see. Dun, 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 dun. Just checking who's on here to make sure that I don't pull somebody's name that isn't on. Okay, so the winners of the journals, if you are on, there's 2 journals. The first winner is Amanda Tanner Stone. Are you still on? Amanda, you get a journal. All right. So comment in the feed if you're on, so I know that you actually, and then private message me your address. The second winner for a journal is Nushin Johnson. You get a journal. There you go. Congratulations. You don't have to send me your address. I know where you live. All right, and then, so let me write those down, and then we'll do our Peter Rabbit collection. All right, let's see. The full Peter Rabbit collection goes to Melissa Randall. Melissa Randall, you've won the 12 book collection of the Peter Rabbit series. If you're still on, that one's for you. So just comment, let me make sure that you're still on, and I will send that out to all of you. Okay, so that's the drawing. Thanks for staying on. If you're interested in the little kid preschool stuff, I have one other thing that I felt like might not apply to everyone. And all right, I got all 3 of you, Amanda, Nushin, Melissa, good. The last thing I wanted to say is about choosing something for your preschooler. Now, what I'm about to tell you is not something that I think you ought to add to if you have a bunch of other kids that are older and are doing school. Your goal should be, how can I incorporate my preschoolers into what my older kids are doing? However, if you have a bunch of little kids, and I would say little kids could include even 6 or 7 as your oldest child and down. Okay, because, and this is if you're just focusing on the math and reading for the younger grades, you're going to have a lot of time, like, what do I do with my kids? And so I would recommend looking into, which I don't know if it's in the homeschool resources, like on Kathy Duffy Reviews, but I would look into the resource, A Year of Playing Skillfully. I just said that really funny. A Year of Playing Skillfully. It's by a lady named Kathy Lee, and she has a lot of creative, active ways to explore learning and education through activities and experiences that you can come up with in your own house. But it's structured enough so that each month you can choose a few science things and a few social studies things, a few math things, a few art things. And it's all broken down. But it's a great thing if you've got a lot of little kids and you're wanting to incorporate a lot of active things into your learning. So that's called A Year of Playing Skillfully, and that's by a lady named Kathy Lee. Actually, it's Kathy Lee Eggers now. She, for a while, had a podcast as well. She doesn't now. I mean, it's not current, but she also wrote a book called The Homegrown Preschooler. So this is great for little kids, and I'm going to tell you something that people told me when I had little kids, and I didn't listen. And I'm going to tell you, and you're probably not going to listen to, but I'm going to tell you anyway, because I wish I had listened. When your kids are young, and I'm talking about all the way up through like age 7, okay? I know that they start school at 6, you're legally supposed to start teaching them, but there's so many creative ways you can teach them. Focus on having a good time and exploring. Focus on playing. There's some states that say 4.5, I think Georgia is like 4.5 hours, or the equivalent of 180 days, 4.5 hours of learning each day. And I just want to address this especially for younger kids, that number one, it's equivalent of, so if you buy a program that's 180, meant for 180 days, and you complete the program, that would be equivalent to 180 days of that curriculum, right? You also can do all kinds of things with your little kids that can count as school. And she's got some great ways of using everyday activities and how they count for different subjects. And keeping it very structured and helping them learn some different things, but also it's just a lot of fun. So if you're interested in something for your preschoolers, I would check out that. It's going to be like a stack of loose leaf pages, and you buy your own 3-ring binder and stick it in there, and it's like just the whole plan. And it's set up to plan each month. So that's been really helpful for some different families that have little kids. The other thing, if you are new to homeschooling and you're starting to pick out what do you need to do and how long should it take in the day, something that a lot of new homeschoolers hear and need to be told on a regular basis, even me, I had to remind myself, is that a public school, when they count a 4.5-hour day, a lot of schools determine whether or not it was a full day or not by whether or not they ate at the school that day. If it included lunch on either the back end or the front end, it can count as a day of school. And I just want you to notice that lunch was included in the hours of learning. Also, waiting in line for the bathroom is included in the hours of learning. Also, sitting in the classroom waiting for the teacher to deal with a disciplinary issue for another child is included in their counted hours of learning. Also, announcements on the loudspeaker. All these different things. Recess outside is included in the hours of learning. There's a lot of time where kids wait for what needs to be learned just by default. They have, like, it's a big class. I'm not downing them. It's what has to happen, but it is incorporated in those hours that are counted. And so when you're trying to come up with, oh my goodness, I have to teach my child for 4.5 hours every day, I want you to remember that word equivalent and recognize that if you're tutoring one child, it is going to take a lot less time to tutor that one child than it does to wait for a whole class of 30 to get done with a particular task. And so there are all kinds of ways that you can document that they are learning new things. If you are nervous about counting 4.5 hours and you want to document that they're learning something during that time, be aware of the other things that they're learning. Like, are you having them learn how to cook anything in your kitchen? Are they learning how to do their own laundry? Are they learning how to weed in the garden? You know, STEM class at school is planting things, weeding, watering, picking the fruits and vegetables that they've grown, learning how to take care of the plants, those things, or building something new. Home improvement projects, if you teach your kid how to paint something in your house or how to redecorate or how to reorganize their room or things like that, all of those things can come under the educational process and the equivalent of 4.5 hours of learning a day. So it's okay to get creative about what they're learning. If they are having a fight, they're learning about conflict. They're learning about how to get along with each other, conflict management, good communication skills. And you'll notice that when a child gets a report card from a public school, that they get a lot of those evaluations on that form. Do they have good communication skills? Do they have the skills of being able to interact well with their friends next to them? Are they kind? Are they able to follow directions? Those are all things that they're learning. So if you spend an hour squabbling with your child and arguing about whether they are or are not going to do their work, they are learning the skill of following directions. Congratulations, right? So this is not in an attempt to skirt the need to teach them. That's not what we're trying to do. But we are recognizing that very tailored, independent teaching that our kids get means that just by default, they can get through their studies a lot faster. And I would say on average, my kindergarten, first, second graders can get all of their work done in an hour and a half on average. And then we move on to other fun things like music or playing outside or building a dam in the creek or whatever. Those are other activities that they do. Also, I just want to put a plug out there for one of my children was in an engineering class in his 9th grade class last year in public school. And for at least half of that class spent the majority of the time doing things in Minecraft. So for all you homeschoolers out there, a little perspective on whether or not video games can count. Don't let your kids hear that, but you can hear that, okay? Plug their little ears. But that was one of the things that they used as a learning tool in his engineering class in high school. So a lot of things can count that probably we give ourselves a really hard time for as homeschoolers. All right. So just a couple of encouragement pieces there. Oh, I didn't post homework. I know this is a little long. They keep being long. But if you wanted your check off list for your homework, first, A, choose your philosophies. B, the primary things, if you're going to deal with picking out academics, nail down your math and your language arts. Math, we're using Saxon this year. Language arts, classical conversations uses IEW's curriculum. We're using the US-based history writing lessons and the essentials English grammar program from Classical Conversations. So IEW is not Classical Conversations. You can get that outside of Classical Conversations. But I like the support structure that we get through CC in order to be able to do that. Those are the two that we're doing. And then for what other subjects do you need material for, and gradually figure those out, and then back off. It's a hole that you can go into that never has a bottom, trying to figure out all the cool things that you could teach your kids. And I encourage you nail down these two. And especially if you have younger kids that aren't in middle school or high school yet, nail down these two and then choose, a little bit of extra stuff. And then whatever you think that you're going to get done, you overambitious people, back off of it, all right? Curriculum is a tool. It's not the master. It's not the dictator. Just because somebody else sets it up that you have to go through this many lessons in this many days does not mean that that's what you have to follow. You're the teacher. You're in charge. The curriculum is a tool. Don't let it run your life. You run it, okay? So if you start feeling anxious or overwhelmed about the amount of work that the child has to do, remember, you get to decide that they don't have to do it. And if you honestly know that it's too much for your kid, use that as a guide for backing off, not as I've failed him and therefore I have to push them harder this year to make them successful. All right. So just a couple of tips about back off. Less done well in kindness is going to absorb more and be a lot more fun environment in your family than ramming them through a very aggressive schedule and program. All right. Okay. So that's all, unless there's any further questions. Anybody else have feedback or things that they want to ask about curriculum? I'll wait just a little bit because there's a time delay. You guys have been very patient to have these sessions go over an hour. I didn't know how long they would take just because I've never done them before. So thank you for being the guinea pigs to doing these sessions brand new. This was gold. Thank you so much. You are so welcome. Can you repeat what you said about less done well? Yes. Maybe. Let's see. It was something like less done well and in kindness is going to be absorbed more effectively than ramming through an aggressive program. Less done well with kindness is the phrase that probably needs to stick. Less done well with kindness. Because they're in a frame of mind to absorb it. That's the idea, is that they're in a frame of mind to absorb the information when it's less done well with kindness. So yeah, good. I'm so glad it's helpful, Sarah. You're so welcome. Tomorrow we're going to talk about supplies and how to figure out what your child needs for supplies when you don't get a supply list from the teacher. That's something that you end up having to create yourself. And I'm going to show you a really structured way to create that supply list. But the more you know what you're doing for curriculum, the easier it will be to create that supply list. So this is a little bit painting like painting a room that you spend a lot of time prepping before, and like the paint is what you really want to do. You really just want to I want to get the stuff and I want to get it in my house and I want to start. And so we're doing a lot of prep work, like the sanding and the mudding and the taping and the caulking and all of those annoying steps that we have to do before we can actually paint a room. This is the same process. We're doing all of this preliminary stuff. And then once you've got all of these things figured out and you've got your lists made and things like that, it's all going to just click right off. And you'll be like, bam, ordered, bam, supplies here, bam, all set up. I'm ready to go. And that part will go really fast once you've done all of this preliminary work. So hang in there. We're gonna work on the supplies tomorrow, and I can't wait to see you. Go get your curriculum figured out today, okay? And if you have questions, post them in the discussion feed, or there's loads of homeschool forums out there that have lots and lots more experience in the group, thousands of people. And as a result, you can get tons of ideas from them. So don't forget to leverage that for what you need. All right. Remember to ask good questions, like what we talked about on the first day. Use a good question form to do that. All right. All right. That's all for today. I'll see you later. 9 a.m. tomorrow.